I think it's a defense mechanism. It's coping, it's perceived safety, self-preservation, especially after traumatic events, is we kind of go into that fight or flight response. And certainty is comforting. And it doesn't have to be healthy certainty, right? We get into these patterns that may be toxic or unhealthy, whether it's relationships with significant others or family, friendships, or just in work. We get into this toxic behavior because it's comfortable. We know what to expect. And so it's hard to change that pattern.
Welcome to the MVP Podcast. I'm here with Meghan. I should introduce myself first. I'm Aaron, one of the therapists here. Meghan, I'm here with Meghan, who's another therapist here. And Meghan, why don't you take a minute just to introduce yourself?
All right. Hello. Again, my name is Meghan Reese, and I am an LPC candidate, a therapist here at Mountain Vista.
Awesome. So I'd like to start these with just a little bit about how you got into the field and how you became a therapist and your journey here. So take it away.
All right. Sounds good. My journey here was a long one. This is my second career. I was in leadership in the nonprofit industry for over a decade for most of my career. And I had a pretty big loss in my life and a lot of therapy along the way. And so I kind of changed directions based on that grief experience and really wanted to help others through life transition, grief, loss, and trauma. So that's why I'm here today, through my experiences and how I can help see someone else through it.
Awesome. Is grief and loss, is that one of your primary focuses for the therapy that you do with clients now?
It's my passion area, and really it comes alongside trauma work. So trauma work is really my focus area. And in that is so much grief and loss anyway. And so it ends up being a kind of a mix of focus areas for me. I do have like a personal passion for the grief and loss, and that tends to show up in all the spaces.
Yeah. And it does. Yeah. Life is full of different things that go wrong, or I'm sure it impacts every client that we see and that you see in different ways. I'd love to hear a little bit about your approach with grief and loss and how you address those things with clients.
Absolutely. My approach with grief and loss is really to be there. I think what's most important, a lot of people don't know what to say or feel this need to fix or to say something profound when someone has had a great loss. And for me, it's the ability to sit with how uncomfortable grief is and just be someone that listens and not necessarily having to say anything, and just understanding that the grief process is not linear, nor does it go away. And I think we have a culture that, we get 3 days bereavement and you go back to work and you get through the year of firsts and then everything goes back to normal. And I think that's really a misconception for those who haven't been through grief themselves. So it's really just sitting with someone in loss and them knowing that I know the feeling and being able to have that empathy and unconditional positive regard. That's the basis of all of my grief work. And it's less about any specific modality or process. It's the ability to just sit with it.
Yeah. And it strikes me that so much of what happens in our culture is about avoiding pain altogether and avoiding uncomfortable feelings and all of that. So it's the total opposite of what happens, broadly speaking.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. That avoidance, and we know the more that we suppress things, the more internal chaos that's created. So just having a space to talk about someone that we love that passed, or to talk about how hard grief is a release for people, because society is giving us platitudes and things that start with "at least," and it's dismissive. And so I think that we need a space to not avoid, and an hour once a week is getting a chance to say all the hard things and feel safe. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Um, how does your own journey through that process impact the work that you do with clients?
Well, it's why I'm here. So it is a huge reason. That I think what it is I see something in myself in everybody's story. And it's not in a putting my feelings into their journey, but just remembering. I told myself I'd never forget how hard it was and is, especially the first couple of years, and how I was treated and the things that people say. I'm just reminded of that. And so I think it just created this unlimited sense of empathy. And so even though the journeys are different, it's just knowing, just having empathy is so important in this space. And that's what I kind of carry with me. And I'm reminded that that's enough. Really, I don't have to know all the answers and say anything wise. It's just that feeling of empathy.
Yeah. And being there
Yes.
with someone else in their pain.
Yes, I think I realized in my journey that not everybody gets it.
Mm,
And so just having someone that understands a little bit, even though the journeys are all very, very different, just to have someone where you don't have to say anything, and someone who's not having rebuttals to something that you say when you say something hard. I think that's been pretty powerful to watch.
absolutely. Yeah. And it also strikes me too, I think the idea that you can fix a feeling, or just get over it, or all of a sudden things are going to be better when you hit X number of months or days or whatever,
Yes.
can almost increase the pain, because you feel like not only are you grieving a, a loss, but then you should be feeling some other way than you are.
Yeah, 100%. It's harmful because we're setting expectations on loss,
Yeah,
um, and trying to provide hope. And when a lot of people are feeling pretty hopeless, and being the ability to just stay in that sad state is actually the only way to get through it. And so having a space to do that, I think for me was really critical, and what I hope to give to my clients too.
yeah. Well, thank you for doing that work. Um, I know it must not be easy. It's not an easy thing to sit with so much pain.
Thank you.
Um, what else is important to you as a therapist, and what are your other areas of focus, or
Yeah.
the things that bring life to your practice?
I think for me, a recurring theme that you'll hear is empathy. I remember being in school and just being a bit overwhelmed by all the modalities. There's so many different ways to be a guide and to help others. And it was overwhelming because I want to learn all the modalities, right? I want to know everything about everything. That's just kind of my personality, is that knowledge. And at the end of the day, regardless of what I'm working on with someone, having empathy is number one to me. Like, that's my foundation. Um, and allowing the client to be who they are, and to really determine how we move forward and what healing looks like for them. Again, there's no fixes. Um, I think what's of second importance to me is pacing, really is pacing the therapeutic process and paying attention, knowing when a client's maybe a bit overwhelmed, paying attention to body cues. So the somatic work is really powerful for me, calling attention to that softly and getting people to be grounded in their bodies. And that's a way to process not only grief and trauma, but just kind of daily stress too, is being aware. And so that's kind of where I love to be. Just mindfulness practices, somatics, and again, having people practice being aware and noticing and pausing.
Yeah, soma- somatic work, I feel like is so powerful, but I don't know if your average person really knows even what that means. Um, can you say more a little bit about what that means and what that looks like in therapy and in your work?
I can. And I say that from a place of still growing and learning, obviously, and finding different things that work. I think for every client, somatics is different because not everybody is comfortable. You know, a lot of people are walking through the world so numb. And so even just getting someone to notice their own heartbeat is somatics for me. Like, is it faster, slower now when we're talking about something? And oh, I see your hands clenched when we talk about this one thing. And so, really, for me, somatics is grounded in just awareness first, of just knowing that you're sitting on my sofa, knowing that you're in the room, your feet are on the ground. So, just noticing their body and how it reacts to different circumstances, even when just going back and talking about something that's hard or even something that's joyful and noticing how that feels in the body. That's somatics for me. And being able to really figure out what that looks like for each client and seeing their mini epiphanies. They're like, oh, my shoulders touch my ears when I talk about that because I'm so stressed. And that must be where I carry tension. And those little epiphanies are really can be life-changing for people to see how incremental it is and the big impact that it has. That's the somatic work for me.
Yeah, and I imagine with trauma, that's particularly helpful.
100%.
Um, can you talk a little bit about somatic work specifically with trauma and what that looks like?
Yeah, I think with trauma, talk therapy is helpful, right? But for some people, for some clients, it's also re-traumatizing and activating. And so a lot of my clients ask questions like, do I have to regurgitate everything that's ever happened to me? Or do I have to tell you all the details? And I can kind of see the panic start to set in, right? Do I have to tell you all the hard things in order to work through them? And no, that's the beauty of somatics. And not that talk therapy isn't helpful too. I integrate that obviously in a lot of the work as well. But being able to know where that trauma resides in the body is just a really powerful way to work through it without having to tell me verbally all of the hard things. So it's a little less activating, not that it's, trauma work is going to bring up things as we release them, but knowing where it is in the body allows clients to be able to, I guess, access that part of them without it being so dysregulating and disruptive. So that's where the pacing comes into and being able to notice when a client is feeling dysregulated and then them learning what that looks like. And with somatics, it's just a little bit, I guess, lighter for them to be able to access on their own and notice how they're feeling. So it's probably one of my favorite ways in trauma to really work through it, because I'd say at least 50% of my clients with trauma are so nervous to have to say all the things at once. And so they feel I can see the relief on their face when I'm like, you don't really have to tell me every little thing. Like, we can just figure out where it is and how that manifests for you. And that's how we kind of gently go about it.
Yeah. And two, as we recognize where we carry things in our body and the different tension and other things that may be going on, you can apply that to your everyday life. It's
Yes.
a nice thing to have in your back pocket all through the week versus just that 1 hour you're spending with a therapist potentially talking something.
Yeah. I love that you point that out because we see clients once a week, right? And so all the moments in between that are just as important. actually more important than that 1 hour that we have with them. So even being able to just breathe and get through a tough moment in between sessions is, I think, empowering for clients and really gives them confidence. I'd say my number one is it gives clients the confidence that they can tolerate more than they think they can. It increases their window of tolerance, self-trust, confidence, which really impacts the rest of their life as well. So it is, um, in my opinion, really more powerful than just the 1 hour.
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned trusting yourself, and that strikes me as something that's really important in for a lot of people who have experienced any range of difficult things. There can be a real lack of trust of self, and
Yes.
sometimes lack of self-esteem or self-efficacy. Um, does that come into your work as well? Um, Helping people to start trusting themselves again?
100% of the time. Yes. I think with trauma work specifically is kind of the repercussions of that and a lot of shame and guilt that comes with that and people kind of rethinking their own choices of is it my fault, could I have done anything differently? So learning to trust yourself again is such a huge part of the process, and it comes in small increments like setting boundaries and all the work that we would typically do anyway is so important for someone to regain that sense of self, to be able to advocate, to trust, to build confidence. I think that self trust is really, there's so much more that you can do when you trust your ability to make decisions and to feel safe. It really regulates the nervous system when you trust that you kind of know how to take care of yourself.
Yeah, I mean that makes so much sense. Um, and the way that we can build trust in our but the connection of the somatic and trusting and recognizing, you could even recognize in your body when you're not trusting yourself or feeling some sort of tension that is blocking you from that. It seems so powerful.
It really is. I have clients often begin to know, again, I always use the word notice. I'm sure my clients get, I can see their face. They're like, oh, you're using that word again. I'm like, yes, we're noticing. But even in situations, clients start to become uncomfortable in situations because they're noticing how they're feeling and they're learning to trust that gut instinct of like, this doesn't feel great. It may be a trigger from the past or just a situation that they left. Maybe they let it go on too long and they weren't able to speak up for themselves. And so clients will begin to notice, oh, I have a headache or I clench my jaw when I'm in this certain circumstance. And those are I say small, I don't mean small, they're huge. But those are the small things that clients begin to notice that builds trust. Like, okay, my body knows that this doesn't feel great. Then they connect it to the logical part of their brain, like I should make a different choice if I can. So those connections become like how clients navigate in the world and trust themselves. So I think it's amazing to see.
Yeah, and I love that noticing isn't a small thing. Noticing
Yeah, it's
is
huge.
is the window through which we can change our lives, or the door maybe through which we can change our lives. And I love that you highlight that because noticing almost seems trivial. Like, so what? I notice it, but until you notice, you can't change. You can't make different decisions, create a different way of being.
Yes. Yeah, and clients will be like, "I noticed," just like you said, right? "And then what?" I'm like, "Just wait." You'll start to notice things, and then you'll be uncomfortable with them, and then you'll be frustrated, and then something will shift, and that notice will turn into some small action that you can do that makes a huge difference, and so it's interesting to see everyone's process, but there's always that moment of like, "Okay." I'm like, "Oh, you wanted some fireworks after the noticing," and if only, right? But it is powerful, and that what comes after the noticing, those the next steps and that progression are really, yeah, they are. I keep using powerful. That's always the word that comes to mind because it is such a small word that has, big impact.
Yeah, huge ramifications. And I like that you pointed out that when we notice, it can cause discomfort, right? I think about um, maybe a relationship or something that is unhealthy,
Mhm.
and we tolerate it because it's our normal or whatever. But once we start to notice dysfunction or unhealth or whatever, we can be like, is this really what I want in my life? Or that
Yes.
that discomfort can move us towards positive change, which is
Yes.
it's a neat way to think about it.
It is a neat way, and also that discomfort, at least from my perspective, reveals a pattern that we've had. So when we become uncomfortable and like that awareness, we think about the patterns more, that this cyclical nature of the repercussions of trauma or grief or anything, just once we know that pattern, for me, like that's huge because then we start putting little pinpoints in that pattern. We're able to break it a little bit. So I tell clients it's uncomfortable, and that means you're doing it right.
Yeah. How do you think those patterns that you're talking about, how do those develop or come about?
I think it's a defense mechanism. It's coping, it's perceived safety, self preservation, especially after traumatic events, is we kind of go into that fight or flight response. And certainty is comforting. And it doesn't have to be healthy certainty, right? We get into these patterns that may be toxic or unhealthy, whether it's relationships with significant others or family, friendships, or just in work. We get into this toxic behavior because it's comfortable. We know what to expect. And so it's hard to change that pattern because it's better to know it than to live in uncertainty. When you start disrupting unhealthy patterns, it is uncomfortable because you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. And that's where that discomfort kind of comes in. And that is the pacing and that is the hard part of maybe chaotic, but if that's all that you know, then it's very comfortable and that's within your window of tolerance.
Yeah, and I like the the idea that we can tolerate something even though it might not be beneficial or helpful, um, but just bringing the recognition that we have been tolerating something that's unhealthy or that leads us in a negative direction. Just recognizing that pattern is starting the change process.
It is, yeah, and it's a big deal because I think we make these assumptions sometimes, other clinicians or as people, that people know what healthy and unhealthy look like. And it's absolutely not true. And I think one person's healthy is another person's unhealthy. And so that's where it's important to look at each client and really lean into their experiences and how it manifests for them, what it looks like for them, because it's just really different. And we can't live under the assumption that, like, that's unhealthy. Because one, that's shame inducing, right? Of like, they just might not know. It's if all they know is toxicity and trauma, then we meet them there and slowly help guide into, better decision making and learning how someone should be treating you and what you deserve. And that comes back to the self trust component too, of kind of figuring out what that looks like for you.
Yeah, I love your attitude of humility there. I I think about um, we're each the expert in our own lives, and the way you approach people and knowing that, what you think or what I think about X, Y, or Z, that doesn't really matter. It's what they think about it that matters.
Yeah, I think they're already bringing to the table what they know of themselves, and it's just kind of I feel like I say partner and guide because I don't like the hierarchy of
Yeah,
it, of just, you know, revealing to them in small moments that you know what's best for you. And, just kind of reinforcing that gut instinct in clients because I think they all have it. It just has probably been covered up and, with a lot of I'm not good enough is I'd say most of the trauma and what comes out of that is the feeling of like I'm not good enough. And so getting that back, clients tend to know what's best for them. And yeah, I think that's incredible to watch.
absolutely. And so empowering to know that we already have everything we need to live our best lives. And I love the word partner. I think that's a great word. We're partnering with our people, just
Mhm.
like we need partners. We're all on the same journey together.
Yes.
Um, well, I'd love to hear just about any things in particular that you bring to your work or that are important to you that you would like uh, anyone who happens to be hearing this or watching this, and um, anything that I might have forgotten to ask you, or whatever whatever you would like people to know. I'd love for you to take time to share.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think it's so like the first step is finding a therapist, right? And coming to therapy. And I think we underplay often, we meaning just the world, like how hard that is to just decide that you want help, like that help seeking behavior. And so usually when clients come in, I'm like, high five. You're here. Even if we just sit in silence today, like you made such a huge step in even coming in. So again, going back to that self-trust of you needed a little assistance right now and you want to work on something like that in of itself is such a power move to be able to know. And that's kind of what I piggyback off with clients when I start of like, tell me what else you'd want to do. Like, what else do you think is best for you? And of course, I guide with modalities and, kind of figure it out together. Again, it is a partnership. So just the fact that someone's showing up is hard. And so that's where I go. I think something that clients will get with me too is authenticity. Like it's me. I'm human too. And so we're often in here with a little bit of dark humor, drinking a cup of tea, you know, sitting in the dark moments and then able to come to a little bit of lightness and laugh. And my rule is nobody leaves my office dysregulated. I have a lot of sour candy to get us through and ice cold water. It's just having this safe space. Like that's what I want to create is just a safe space where people feel comfortable to say absolutely anything that you don't think that you can say outside of this office. And then I bring just me. I have this academic background, right? And I'm a therapist, but I'm also a person. And I think I reflect that well with clients as sometimes you'll get goofy comments back and, questions because I want to really learn about your life. And I'm also pretty open when people ask me questions, of course, appropriate. But I feel like in my journey, one of the number one things that was so helpful with trauma was self disclosure from my therapist when appropriate, as needed. We're not taught that in school. It's like, oh, don't say anything about yourself. I'm like, okay, that's kind of the guiding principle, right? But it was life altering for me to know where my therapist came from in just a sentence or two. So I'm always mindful of what I bring that could be helpful, and also respecting the client's autonomy and making sure that this is their space. So I try to just bring me and hope it's a fit.
I know you do amazing work, so thank
Thank
you for taking the time to share, um, and creating that safe place for people to come and bring themselves and heal and grow. It's a real gift. So thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on this side of the couch.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much, Erin. It was really lovely to talk to you and like have this space. So I appreciate it.
awesome. All right. Well, we will see you later, Megan, and we'll talk with our audience again soon.
All right. Bye.